For the next item of the agenda, it's 24/7 renewable energy, a primer. Dan Sagaden will provide this primer. It's a really important topic, and I'll let Dan explain what it's about. Some of you know Dan Sagaden. He's been an active Marine Conservation League COG member for the past, 5-6 years. He's currently chair of the board of the Marine Community Clinics, a large community health center, just $60 million a year plus operation, big. In the past, among other positions, Dan was a consultant and was a senior vice president, a senior executive at Advanced PCS, a large healthcare firm. We're lucky that Dan has turned some of his attention to complex clean energy issues. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dan.
All right. Thank you, Bob, for that generous introduction. Just kicking up here. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
All right. Great. Well, welcome everyone. At first glance, as Bob might have kind of alluded to this is kind of a highly technical issue. And a few slides in, you're going to be thinking, wow, this is pretty technical. What is all this about? And the reason we're covering it is it's a really foundational issue, because how you kind of measure greenhouse gas emissions or the degree of renewable energy on the grid is foundational to how you assess how well MCE is doing, or how you assess the best time to charge your EV or discharge your EV to the grid. So we'll get into that right now, but I just wanted to say that bear with the technicality for a bit, because this is important. This is fundamental to how we measure greenhouse gas emissions and renewable energy, and it's fundamental to how we monitor our progress. So just real quick, I kind of alluded to the importance of the topic just now, but we'll quickly go over that. And then I'm going to give a really simplified example, much overly simplified, to demonstrate this issue of what we call annual matching versus 24/7. Some people say it's annual accounting versus 24/7 accounting or whatever, but matching is a little more descriptive. And you'll kind of see the different results it can give. Then we'll go through some real examples. That'll be based on Peninsula Clean Energy's white paper that they did on this. They were the kind of ones who recently brought this to the forefront based on some earlier papers that occurred at Google, who were looking kind of at their use of data centers and were they really 100% renewable or greenhouse gas free or not? And they decided they clearly weren't. So anyway, that PC white paper has a bunch of things in it that I'll be tapping into and showing you. And then finally, we'll do conclusions and next steps. So just to be clear what this is, I'm just defining it here. In case you haven't heard the term, 24/7 is also known as hourly matching. It's just a more accurate method of measuring actual carbon emissions on the grid. Or you could also, I'm going to say that kind of synonymously with renewable energy. It's the same exercise that you would go through. So I'll use those kind of synonymously, even though I know they're not. So the importance of this topic is really, as I alluded to, we need to be able to have a very accurate measurement standard to see how much renewable or GHG free energy is on the grid. So if we want to focus and work towards something, we better be able to measure it and know what we're working toward and know what appropriate goals are. And then, as Bob put in the introduction to this piece, in the written introduction, there is a very big difference in currently reported, which is an annual matching, versus actual carbon emissions. And actual carbon emissions are based on this 24/7 or hourly matching. And it's really the hourly matching that is the real story. So we're going to get into that, but let me just show you this to kind of show you the magnitudes here, because they're a little bit shocking at first. These are actual Peninsula Clean Energy CO2 emissions. They're shown in pounds of carbon dioxide per megawatt hour on the vertical axis there. And, I'm not going to go through every bar here, but just to give you a feel for this, that bar labeled annual 100%, what they're saying is that when we say we are 100% greenhouse gas free on this annual method of accounting, so to speak, we are actually still 155 pounds of carbon dioxide per megawatt hour. So that kind of highlights the issue right there. And then the 4 bars you see, on the right-hand side, those are different degrees of hourly matching. You're going to understand what that means at the end of this presentation, but 90% hourly just means for 90% of the hours in the year, you have matched the supply to the load and there's no mismatch. You'll learn why that's important. 95% is you've matched 95% of the hours, etc. So with that, I'm going to get into this. As I said, this is not just simplified, this is extremely oversimplified, but we'll need this to kind of get the construct. Once you get this, it gets pretty easy, and then we'll look at the real life graphs. So I want you just to assume a scenario where all of a CCA's load, and you can imagine this is MCE, MCE's load, or energy usage is just another word for load, occurs between 4 p.m. and 10 p.m., all of it. And assume that all the generation, you can picture a solar facility if you want, greenhouse gas free, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. is the only time that solar produces. And this happens every day all year. And basically you got 1,000 megawatt hours of load for the year at the end of the year, and you got 1,000 megawatt hours of GHG free generation for the year, provided by that solar panel that was running from 9 to 3. So you can see here, I have, on an annual basis, this is 1,000 megawatt hours were generated by, say, MCE in that solar plant, and 1,000 megawatt hours were used. You're kind of all matched up. You can see, though, you're completely mismatched on a time basis. Completely mismatched. There is no overlap. So let's now look at kind of what this means. So in an annual matching basis, which is the way we do things today, it's the way when you see reports from MCE, it's the way they report, it's the way the CPUC expects you to report. You get this result. You have basically, since your load was 1,000 megawatt hours and you generated 1,000 megawatt hours of GHG free generation, you're 100% GHG free, and you have 0 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. And you see the second bullet point there. It's just saying, like, hey, the load that was there, you supplied the GHG generation, and that generation got used by the grid during the year. So everything's good. And obviously the hourly time match, as I alluded to before, between load and generation is ignored. So this raises kind of a key question. And the question is simple. What is really happening on the grid due to the hourly mismatch? And the really important questions are, what was the carbon content of the grid energy that served the CCA's load during the hours the load occurred? So from that 4 to 10 p.m. time frame, what kind of energy were you using? And what was the carbon content of the grid energy that was displaced by the CCA's generation during the hours the generation occurred? And that's that midday solar plant, 9 to 3. So those are the really key questions. And now I'm going to show you a different calculation. This is the 24/7 calculation. And let's just say I'm making up these numbers, but they're broadly accurate. that load, that 1,000 megawatt hours of load between 4 p.m. and 10 p.m., when it got served by the grid, because remember, our MCE or our CCA was not producing it, the grid had to serve it. Let's just say it had 500 pounds carbon dioxide per megawatt hour. So the net emissions are 500,000 pounds of CO2. Now, let's say the supply that occurred, that reduced emissions because it displaced, things on the grid that might have been greenhouse gas intensive. But let's say the displacement was at 300 pounds of carbon dioxide per megawatt hour. And so your net gain, your net savings were 300,000. You can see here, you got a very different story. You've got 200,000 pounds of CO2 were emitted, and that's 200 pounds per megawatt hour. So what is going on here? I've highlighted in red, the key assumption here that's driving this huge difference in measurement. So why is that? What is fundamentally happening here? And the key concept to kind of understand is the concept of kind of the marginal generator, and just understand what is going on at the grid at different times of the day. So for instance, during the evening, the grid will generally serve incremental load with, more inefficient natural gas plants. In the evening, you tend to have more inefficient natural gas plants. They have higher CO2 emissions per megawatt hour. And you also have some peaker natural gas plants. And they have, of course, the most CO2 emissions per megawatt hour, unless we're including coal, which there's no coal we're accessing on the grid. So you basically are, that load that is occurring is being served by very carbon intensive resources. And then during the day, what happens? Well, the grid will generally respond to the incremental generation by, in the best case, you will displace an efficient natural gas plant. And that's decently likely. You'll displace some natural gas, but it's a more efficient plant with a lower rate of carbon emission per megawatt hour. So you're kind of losing a bit there because you displaced something that was efficient and you replaced it, or when you were serving your peak load, you were using an inefficient plant. So right there, there's a little bit of loss. The other possibility, and this all depends on grid conditions, season of the year, time of the day, a whole bunch of factors, which I won't get into. You could be displacing some large hydro or another clean resource. And then finally, in the worst case, you could have curtailment. Your solar plant could be curtailed, and you could, because there's excess generation on the grid. And so you get curtailed. So this slide is kind of the core to show you kind of incrementally what happens on the grid and why there's this big difference and why the hour matters. So we went from 0 to 200, a very different measurement. And now I hope you can see kind of why. So, and this is not much more complicated than saying something you already know, which is that the energy used during the evening is much more GHG intensive than energy supplied in the middle of the day. And 24/7 basically captures this reality, whereas annual accounting ignores all of that and just calculates it annually. And that's where you got the 0 from before. Okay, so now we're going to go, I'm going to show you some real graphs and examples. And we are going to kind of focus on just visually looking at this mismatch. But I'm going to have to kind of orientate you to the graph. And then we'll kind of show how you could be annually matched, but you're not hourly matched. I'll just kind of point that out. This will all be visual. So let's start with these graphs, by the way, I think are just very helpful. They tell you a lot. So you can see here the power or megawatts is on the vertical axis. You've got the hour of the day on the horizontal axis, 24-hour day. this is for spring. This is from the PCE report. It's saying, hey, in spring, on the average day in spring, they've had to average this over 90 days. Here's what's going on. And you can see the black line that's the load. That's how much their users are using in terms of energy. And then the various colored bars, I mean, I hope you can see my cursor. We've got geothermal, kind of red-orange at the bottom. We've got a very small amount of small hydro. Then we've got wind. You can see the generation profile of the wind, how it's blowing more in the morning, and then it kind of dips in the middle of the day, and then it comes back up in the evening. So you can right away see the generation profile of the resource. And then solar is shown in the yellow. The light green is when the solar is charging a battery. The dark green is when it's discharging. And so you can see the, again, the generation profile of the solar. You see it coming on, going up here, and then coming back down. And of course, you can see what's happening to the grid, because, if you take away and kind of subtract in your mind this storage that's being charged in these light green bars, you can then see that the net effect on the grid would be to the top of the yellow bar. And then when you get to the discharge, you can see the net on the grid would be to the top of the dark green bar. So I go through that just because these kind of charts do tell you a lot. And, assuming this were a whole year, and you were kind of doing annual accounting, I'm focusing now on the mismatch. You can see that on an annual basis, you could take some of this excess solar here that's above the load curve, this yellow lines, and move it into these shoulders, from up to 5 a.m. and then late at night in this shoulder. And then you would be all accounted for and good. And that's how you would come up with your zero. On the other hand, you can see that, well, wait a sec, for 5 hours here and for 3 hours here at night, that's 8 hours of the day you're not matched. And because of that mismatch in load, you're having to fill this gap with probably more carbon intensive resources. And although you made up for it and supplied some resources here, you didn't displace something as carbon intensive. So that is kind of the heart of the problem. And so now I'm just going to show you again from PCE's report. This is again an annual accounting, and they are showing, look, when we get to 100% greenhouse gas free on an annual basis, and also since all their sources that you see there are renewable, they also can claim that they're 100% renewable. They're kind of saying, well, this is the one that gives us 155 concentration of CO2 per megawatt hour. And this is what it looks like in each season of the year. So you can see why these graphs are kind of useful and, to look at. I mean, look at the difference between summer and winter. Just start there. Summer has, more wind than the winter. You'll also notice much more solar because the sun is up 14 hours a day versus 10. So these are big seasonal variations. And you can see that the hourly mismatch in the winter is pretty distinct as measured by, this difference between the load and the top of the supply stack bars. It's not so big in the summer. So you can see that, again, though, on the annual basis, you can take the excess that's above the black line and allocate it to the blank areas below the black line and claim you are 100%. So that's what that does. Now we're going to show when PCE said, you know what? If we get to 99% matching of the hours and which basically reduces the carbon content down to this 25 from 155, so an 80+% reduction, here's what it looks like. And as you can see, there's only a few hours here in the winter, late at night, 10, 11, whatever that is, PM, where they're not matched. That's the 1%. The other 99%, they are either at their load or they're above it. And so this is what it would look like to achieve 99% hourly matching. And it's also what it looks like to reduce your greenhouse gases by, 80+%. So that, I think, gives you the picture of, with some real graphs of what's really happening and getting some dynamics of what goes on the grid. You can see here, I'll just point this out because I think I know the next slide is going to comment this. In addition to this carbon substitution effect that you get, when you do 99%, you essentially have to over-acquire energy at certain times of the day. Said another way, in order to match 99% of the hours in a year with enough energy, you have to acquire enough energy through PPAs or whatever it is to, when you have a situation where the grid has more excess energy during the spring when the large hydro is running or whatever the situation, more solar, etc. You get a situation where all this excess energy now is hitting the grid, and some of it will be wasted or curtail another resource, but some of it at certain times does curtail some natural gas. So I just said, I think what was covered here, that this is another benefit that basically PCE identifies, that they essentially have to over procure energy in order to meet the hourly requirement. And then that may result in some additional displacement of carbon intensive resources when it's supplied to the grid. So that's kind of the picture of what's going on. Let me just make a note about deep green, because I think if you're looking at this and you're thinking about it, you're thinking, whoa, what about deep green? That's 100% renewable. It's right. Well, deep green does use annual matching. And so we won't get into all of it here, but let's just say, we still support deep green as a great first generation product. It was definitely, ahead of its time, a good thing to do. And it definitely led to some incremental renewable energy procurement on MCE's part. And it also, because of the way it works, it funds some local projects. So, we like deep green. But the question that this whole thing begs is, well, what does version 2 of deep green look like? And at a recent MCE board meeting, they basically raised this issue, not explicitly, but said, we're kind of relooking at it and we want to kind of, they're just revamping it, but it's not clear how they're going to revamp it at this point. So I just wanted to make that comment. As you can see, this is pervasive because this is measurement. And so, any claim by utility or CCA about their carbon emissions or their renewable content, it's all kind of subject to, okay, is it annual matching? Is it hourly matching? How are you measuring that? That is, unfortunately, it's a technical point, but we have to understand it. So just to tie up here, some conclusions. 24/7 is much more accurate and realistic way of accounting for GHG emissions or renewable energy penetration on the grid than the current system of annual matching. Also, CCA commitments to increase degrees of hourly matching would definitely lead to better targets and lower carbon emissions. And then finally, we have focused on supply and procurement here and those supply stacks and so on. But demand management is a very complementary way to make these improvements, and in some ways could be cheaper. I mean, if you just look back at something like this chart, if you could move, some of this load here from, hours 0 to 5 or whatever, where they're short, and put it up here where there's resources that are clean being served, you would get out of this game. So moving around and changing the shape of the load curve is obviously another way to do this. So what are next steps? Well, we're very early stages in this. We're just beginning discussions with MCE starting in the next couple of weeks. You see the topics here. It's basically, getting them to confirm that yes, 24/7 is the way to go. Get them to tell us what their 24/7 carbon emissions would be and renewable energy penetration based on measured that way. Just communicate them the desirability of kind of showing us some of the load and generation on these hourly mismatch charts that I showed you earlier. All those charts, those are very helpful to make people quickly understand what's going on. See if they have any, at this point, potential commitments to specified levels of hourly matching that they could commit to. For instance, PCE, Peninsula Clean Energy, is saying that they're going to commit to 99% hourly matching in 2025. And they've been aggressive. The CEO's been out on podcasts saying this and so on. So, we'll see, but they are acting like this is very doable, and they have models out there and so on that they're sharing. They've got a model on GitHub that shows open source, how they did this, etc. So, we're kind of asking that same question of MCE. There's also a discussion with MCE of procurement versus product. In other words, do they just do certain things on their own through their procurement staff or through demand management versus kind of making it a product and saying, well, we're going to sell this product, and then if people sign up, we will then, acquire energy on that basis. And of course, this relates to plans for deep green. And, we want to talk about demand management. So those are some of the next steps. I just want to remind everyone that you can make a big difference by shifting your energy usage to the 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. timeframe. That is essentially, after the morning ramp, before the afternoon ramp, and when there's a ton of solar on the grid in California. We've got 12,000 megawatts of solar on the grid in California. So there's a lot there, and that is a great time to use energy if you can. And for those who would like more detail, Bob has provided a link to the white paper, of the PCE white paper. It will take you through this in even more excruciating and painful detail. So that's something you could refer to. I had to put in this caveat that this is definitely a primer. We're early in the process. There are some very complex technical issues underneath the surface here, and they relate to how you figure out the marginal emitter. And, that I won't go into that now. If you want in the questions, we can. But anyway, as we engage you, MCE and others, we may alter our views on this. So with that, I just want to say, thank you for the time here, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Dan. It was a great presentation, and gotten a bunch of kudos in chat, which reflects that. And what we have in chat is mostly comments from folks rather than questions. But there is one comment from Leslie Alden, which asks, what is CAISO's and the California Energy Commission's position on this transition? CAISO is the California Independent System Operator, which is the entity that manages the grid. And I know the answer, but Dan, please tell us.
Yeah, well, the answer is the CPUC is looking at this issue. They're looking at it from a reporting perspective. How carbon's reported, how renewable energy resources are reported. I think it's very early phases, and maybe that was just rumor that I heard they were looking at it. I'll have to, maybe Ken can weigh on if there's an actual formal proceeding yet. But they're also concerned about it because they're looking at RA. Historically, they looked at RA from kind of a monthly perspective, and RA was charged to people like MCE based on, megawatt per month, megawatt months. So they were kind of looking at peak months, and increasingly they've realized, no, we got to get down to, certain hours of certain days at certain ambient temperatures. That's how we've got to analyze this. So they're very focused on it. Everyone knows this is kind of the real way to look at it. I don't know Cal ISO's official position. And I don't know CEC's official position, but I do know that, they all kind of acknowledge that this annual accounting is a bit of a fiction, and this is the correct way to look at it. It just presents, more technical challenges.
Yeah. And then David Muller asked the question, how does rate structure, so the rates that customers are charged fit into this matching issue?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good point, David, because obviously, rate structure can change the load curve for people. And that's the hope of the time of use rates, that they will in fact shift load curves, make people use less energy in the ramp, use more in the middle of the day, and so on. So, that is the price signal that's being sent. And, hopefully will be helpful on the margin to improve the situation.
Yeah. I would point people to the Energy Transition Show. Sugar Shaw, who's the head of the Department of Energy's loan program, was the featured guest. And his topic was, he was talking about virtual power plants. And that's a kind of abstract term for some of the load shifting that Dan is talking about here, and also some of the injection into the grid of energy from electric vehicles that a number of people have put into chat. So that's going to be something that is something that is important, and it's going to be important for achieving 24/7 renewable energy, because again, that's moving electricity around, time shifting use and time shifting generation. So we're going to be paying a lot of attention to that. And the issue really is, how do you clean up the grid? That's what 24/7 renewable energy is addressing. And especially when you have increasing electrification of vehicles and buildings. And what virtual power plants does is tap into the increasing electrification in order to help clean up the grid. Dan?
Yeah, I was just going to respond to David Tetta's comment there that, yeah, exactly. Electric vehicles are a big example of this. And, one of the things we found when we were kind of saw some data on MCE's Sync program, which is basically a software program that kind of controls when you charge, is that, the carbon savings weren't that great in that program, or as high as we would expect given the usage, because a lot of the charging, they were kicking it out of the ramp, but they were kicking it then into the middle of the night, like from midnight to 4. And, that's basically a time when there's a lot of carbon on the grid. There's just a lot of carbon on the grid then, because there's no solar, the wind is down. And so this is kind of a classic, example and this isn't always possible, but the best time to charge would be in the middle of the day at work. That would clearly be the best. And you can imagine if we had a huge amount of load in the middle of the day somehow, through electric vehicles charging or whatever, you could then match that with solar, and this whole accounting issue and a lot of this would all go away.
So there have been, as I indicated, a number of comments in chat about the possibility of electric vehicles injecting energy into the grid during periods when the grid is gas powered. So substituting for that gas. And Jim Burrows asked the question: is it unrealistic to think that more battery storage can fill in the white space on your graphs? And I guess there are two questions here. One is battery storage in general, and the other is EV batteries.
Yeah, well, I can only tell you what PCE thinks at this point with the assessment they did. They decided that they would need to fill in those gaps, those white gaps, appropriately named, Jim. Thank you for that. They would need some more solar plus storage. That's one of the big drivers. More wind that outputs more. And you saw that wind out generation profile is, more in the shoulders than solar. Generally depends where the wind is, but generally more in the shoulders. And they also are looking at geothermal and something called enhanced geothermal. So those were kind of the three areas they were looking to source in. So it's fair to say, I think they were saying, no, you can't do it on batteries alone. But then again, this is evolving. Battery technology is evolving. And if you start to define batteries as big gravity batteries and, so on that are being developed, maybe, but they were citing the three sources.
So are there further questions or comments? John?
Yeah, thanks. I've been involved in this space for a long time, the vehicle to grid space, vehicle to home, vehicle to grid, and I've done a lot of calculations on the math and the potential, and even the million EVs plus that roughly that we have in California right now have enough storage that it equals 250 times the largest grid scale storage in existence today. So, and as we ramp up to 5 million EVs, we're talking about gigawatts of energy storage. So what you're talking about, charging your vehicle during the day from the sun and then using those vehicles to fill in those shoulders, it's a no-brainer. It makes so much sense. And it adds so much value to owning an EV, not just for yourself, but for society as a whole. It really is in my mind, it's like a silver bullet, So that's why I think the bill that's about to get voted on in the Senate and, and the technology moving forward is so important. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you, John. Bill?
Sorry. I just want to point out that even using the annual accounting, MCE is not at all renewable energy. Certainly, it's not at all renewable energy system wide. Deep green is still, last I looked, like 8% or so, and it's probably not budging very much from that. So I just wanted to posit and ask, I suppose, but posit that reaching all renewable system wide is still a legitimate task, even if it is measured in annual. And then, 24/7 can get us to the more realistic picture that you're painting. But I don't want to throw MCE off of the basic goal that they haven't reached yet. It does seem that the 24/7 challenge is addressable through a combination of storage and additional renewable generation, and very importantly, as you point out, demand management. So, I think moving forward on all those fronts is a great thing. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on reaching the goal of all renewables system-wide, even if measured annually.
Well, I agree with your assessment, Bill. I guess the extra point I would put on it is I think we got to focus them on the right target, because you could do the wrong things if you only had the annual target. For instance, if you only had the annual target, you would just put up tons of solar in the middle of the day without storage, be cheap, and it wouldn't solve the problem. So we're trying to focus on the right metrics so that they're incented to do the right thing and say, oh, wait a sec. Oh, that's solar, since we're trying to serve and match by hour here, we need to, we need to have storage on that. Oh, and we need to have more wind, and we need more geothermal. I think just choosing the right measurement will get the right actions. So I'm a little wary of just saying, well, let's just focus on annual accounting for now, let them get there, and then focus on hourly. It's a kind of fundamentally different view. And so I think and it's the right view in terms of actually reducing carbon emissions and getting renewables. So I think we want to, kind of shift their perspective so that they're kind of focused on this.
Bill has a very interesting question, which is how is the state taking this analysis into account in their greenhouse gas projections over the next 10 years?
Well, I don't actually know. I do know that, what we're talking about here is what an individual CCA can claim they're doing and so on. But I think when they look at those GHG projections, they do know what the grid is actually putting out as a whole, and that they are then projecting based on that. Realize that everything I've kind of shown here is, it's saying, okay, you as MCE or as a CCA, you had this much load, you had this much supply, you're mismatched, so here's your carbon footprint. It's all at that level. I believe the state is looking at, okay, here's the whole grid. We know the emissions coming off the grid. We don't have to worry about, what this individual CCA is doing or whatever. We got it. And, we know all the generators running every second of the day. And so I assume that's what they're using, but I guess I'll say, Bell, I don't know the answer to your question, but the carbon footprint of the grid is well known by everyone. Bell, you're muted.
You're still muted, Bill.
Okay. What agencies are looking at this? Are they, the ones producing the statewide projections on this subject? And so is there some way of sort of getting to understand how they're interpreting this and what it means for them and their projections? Or is it something, it's just what you said, they're not worried about it?
I think the state, because they're using, the actual grid data, that they're accounting for this in their projections. But again, I don't know. I mean, they have to make assumptions. We know that the CEC comes up with a load forecast. That load forecast, then goes to Cal ISO. This is, for instance, just for transmission planning. And in that load forecast, they are, my understanding is, doing it by, estimates of hour of the day. So, and because Cal ISO needs that to see what the peaks are going to be and valleys and so on. So again, this is really a metric that we need to understand for looking at someone like MCE and what they're claiming or what PG&E is claiming, et cetera, and making sure they're kind of doing the right thing based on looking at the right metric. I'm going to assume, as I said, I don't know, that the state is kind of got a different data set and looking at the whole picture.
Yeah. And very likely it would be California Air Resources Board that would be doing the counting. So we have a bunch of comments about EVs and capacity. John had several comments about their capacity to inject energy into the grid when needed. Ray asked a question about, well, if you put your EV power back into the grid, you're going to have juice to run your car. And there's also the issue of battery degradation. There are a bunch of issues here, and we're going to have another session soon on vehicle to grid integration. At that point, we'll send out some resources. California Energy Commission had a really fascinating webinar, which included some of the key players, including PG&E on this, and which gives their estimate of what the timeline is for having large-scale vehicle-to-grid integration. And looks like it's a couple of years off, but I'll get that resource around. So that's a topic to come. Bob Archer, you have a question?
Just asking Dan, thank you for the excellent presentation. Doesn't this effectively confirm the PUC's move to NEM 3, emphasizing storage as opposed to standalone solar?
Well, yeah, NEM 3 does a lot of things, as you know, but yes, focusing to the extent that NEM 3, does incentivize solar, yes, that's definitely the correct move.
Battery, you mean solar or battery?
So, sorry, I mean batteries. Yes, I mean batteries. Thank you. Yeah, to the extent it is truly incentivizing that, and I don't remember the provisions in NEM 3, the degree of that incentive. You and others are probably more familiar with that. But anything that increases the storage would help.
Right.
Okay. So are there further questions? Seeing none, again, kudos to you, Dan. I think everybody is really pleased with your presentation, and the discussion was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a few minutes remaining, less than 9 minutes remaining. And I see John Sarter's clapping of hands. Yes. So are there quick announcements from various organizations?
Yeah.
Jody, you always have something from 350, Marin?
Yeah, thank you. Just very briefly, not that much today. We do have 2 interns coming this summer, 2 college students we're really excited to work with. So again, if anybody wants to help support them financially, you can make a small donation at 350 Marin. And hopefully they'll be interacting with a bunch of you. Certainly one of my, and I think many of our successes and initiatives are about de-siloing and trying to get more communication and coordination across the county and across the Bay Area. So Fairfax Parade is coming up on June 10th, and we have sort of an entry that's meant to be a coalition of lots of different groups. So if I haven't reached out to you and you'd like to walk in the parade, we're calling the entry Climate Action Now, and having resilient neighborhoods and Ride and Drive Clean and local climate action committees and 350 Marin and other groups. That's just get in touch with me. And then also around the EV and e-bike initiatives, we have joined with San Anselmo's Climate Action Committee to have an EV bike and car show on August 27th. So in the summer, at the end of the summer, that'll be in Fairfax across the street from Good Earth. sponsored by Ride and Drive Clean. We also had a great library event recently, the Fairfax Climate Action Committee, where David Mueller spoke and our vice chair spoke about saving money by going electric. We had 9 people, which was a huge increase from the event we had before with 1 person. So anyway, we're out there trying to do what we can, both groups, that wearing 2 hats. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jody. David?
Yeah, I had one thing I wanted to follow up on. That chart that Christine O'Rourke showed, that showed the current level of jurisdictional adoption of the 3 REACH codes is a very important chart. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at that and see how your jurisdiction stacks up. There's only a few jurisdictions that have adopted all 3 REACH codes. And even those that have adopted some have not adopted all, and some jurisdictions have not adopted any. So we're about halfway there. 6 of 12 jurisdictions have adopted the all electric for new, and then all the other categories are less than half the jurisdictions. So I think that's a really good tool for people to take a look at, see where your jurisdiction stands, and use that to start talking at public comment periods and so on, and pointing out to your jurisdiction staff and electeds where they stand on this transition in Marin County, because there is some pressure from jurisdiction to jurisdiction to not be the last one to act. So it's an important graph to take a look at.
And I've already mentioned that the Senate Majority Leader Mike McGuire is going to be speaking on June 16th, business breakfast starting at 7:30. And I believe there's still space available. I've heard Mike McGuire at previous business breakfast, MCL business breakfast, and boy, he can cover a lot of issues. So that will be really interesting. Any other announcements?
Yeah, I have one.
Go.
Yeah, this is related to Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, that on the 24th, which is next Wednesday, there's going to be a public hearing on the Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Break project. It's 16 miles long. It's the biggest project so far that they've funded. And this is it. So if anybody's interested, I guess I could, quite sure how to get the information out, but it's either you can get on by, you can either go on to Hamilton to be there in person, or you can get on remotely. So I could make this information available. So and also let's not forget tomorrow, which is Ember Stomp, and it starts at between 11 and 1 tomorrow. And I think most people will find it really an invaluable experience. It'll be fun and interesting, and they may have between 3,000 and 5,000 people. So why don't you be among them? Okay.
Yeah, and I am not dismissing the extensive number of chats, by the way, that are dealing with whole EV charging, discharging. Just want to emphasize we'll have a program soon on that where we can deal with it more fully. Are there any other announcements from other groups? And if there aren't, then we're done, folks. Thank you.